first graders, so nice to see you. I was going to start a new book for our read aloud called Tornado, and I thought you might still want to hear it, even if you're at home and I'm at the school. I'm in the library if you're wondering where I am. But this book is called Tornado, and it's by Betsy Byers. It doesn't have a lot of pictures, so you're going to have to listen. Chapter 1, The Storm. Twister, Pete yelled. Twister! I ran for the house. Twister! He pointed. I looked over my shoulder. I could see it, a long black funnel cloud in the west. It pointed from the dark sky right down to our farm. Pete opened the doors to the storm cellar and beckoned with his straw hat. Twister! He shouted again. My two brothers ran from the barn. Pete helped my grandmother down the steps. Hurry up, boys, she called. Then she said to my mother, Come on, Beth. My mother was standing outside the door. She was worried about my daddy. Link, Link, she called. My daddy had been named for a president. Lincoln! He's in the cornfield, Pete said. He can't hear you, ma'am. Still, my mother hesitated. The cornfield seemed to be directly under the funnel. He'll be all right. He can get in a ditch. You come on now. She ducked into the cellar, and Pete pulled the door shut behind her. The storm cellar was dim and cool. It smelled of potatoes and pickles. My mother kept sacks of root vegetables here, along with boxes of eggs and jars of tomatoes. My brothers and I sat on the dirt floor. My grandmother sat on a pickle barrel, and my mother on an orange crate. We sat for a moment, silent. We listened to the storm and worried about my father in the cornfield. Something that sounded like gravel was thrown against the cellar doors. Hail, my mother said, and bowed her head. Pete cleared his throat. You know what this brings to mind, he said. We knew, my brothers and I, and turned to him gratefully. We saw a flash of teeth as he smiled at us. It brings to mind a dog I had one time. Tornado, my brothers and I said together. How do you know his name? He teased. Yes, I did call my dog Tornado. Pete settled his straw hat on his head and began. I remember it was an August day, a whole lot like this one. Chapter 2, In the Doghouse. At breakfast that morning, I remember my mother looked up from the stove, took a breath, and said, I smell a storm. I shivered a little, because my mother's nose was always right. My daddy said, Well, you kids better stay close to the house. The morning went by, slow and scary. We did stay close to the house. Folks didn't call our part of the country Tornado Alley for nothing. About lunch, it hit. Only there was no warning like we had today. No funnel cloud, no nothing. 1 minute we were eating beans and biscuits at the table. Next there was a roar, worse than a train, worse than 100 trains. And then there came a terrible tearing sound, like the world being ripped apart. I can still hear it in my mind. I looked up and I saw sky. The ceiling was clean gone. There was the sky. The tornado had torn the roof off the kitchen and left the food on the table and us in our seats. My daddy was the first to be able to speak. He said, Well, I'm surprised to find myself alive. That was how we all felt. We looked at our arms and legs to make sure they were still hooked onto us. Then my father pushed back his chair and said, Let's go see the damage. Outside, the yard was not our yard anymore. The tree with the tire swing was laid flat. The tops of all the pine trees had been snapped off. A doghouse I had never seen before was beside the well. A piece of bicycle was here, the hood of a car there. I stepped over somebody's clothesline that still had some clothes on it. The roof of the kitchen lay at the edge of the garden. It was folded shut like a book. We walked over there. It was about time for a new roof, my daddy said. He always tried to find the good in something. I was just walking around looking at all the other people's things when I heard a rattling noise. I kept listening and looking, and finally I realized the sound was coming from that doghouse. I went over to it. The doghouse was trembling. You could see it. It was trembling. It was shaking. It was doing everything but having a fit. I looked inside, and there was a big black dog. He was panting so hard I could feel his breath. He was shaking so hard the doghouse was in danger of losing its boards. "Daddy, there's a dog in there." My daddy came over. "Look, Daddy, it's a big black dog." My daddy leaned over and took a look. "Well, you can come on now, out now," he told the dog. "The storm's over, and you're among friends." The dog just kept shaking. "Maybe I can pull him out," I said. "Don't you put your hand in there," my mother said. "Yes, leave him be, Pete." All that day, all that night, all the next day, that dog shook. I brought him water, but he wouldn't drink. I brought him food, but he wouldn't eat. Then that night, my mother leaned out the kitchen door and yelled, "Supper," as she usually did. The dog heard her and stuck his head out of the doghouse. He must have been familiar with that word. He came out, stood there, looked around for a moment, and then gave one final shake as if he were shaking off the past. Then he came over and joined us at the back door. I said, "Daddy, can we keep him, please?" "If we don't find the owner." "Can we call him Tornado?" "Until we find the owner." "We'll have to ask around," my mother reminded me. "I know." My daddy bent down. "Let's see what kind of manners you got, Tornado. Shake." My daddy put out his hand. Tornado put on his paw. They shook like two men striking a bargain. Then we all went into supper. Chapter 3. A Card Trick. "Speaking of Tornado," Pete went on, raising his voice over the sound of the wind, "reminds me of something funny that happened one time." He waited, as if for encouragement. "Is this about the 3 of Hearts?" I asked quickly. "Well, you already know the story. You don't want to hear it again." I do. This is my favorite story in the world." "Well, maybe it wouldn't hurt to tell it one more time." Back in those days, my little brother Sammy and I played cards in the evening. We used to play a game called War, but we were not supposed to play it because that's what it turned into, and my mother was tired of listening to us fight. Anyway, there we were in the kitchen at the table when Tornado came up and poked my leg. He did that when he wanted my attention, to remind me that his dishware was empty or something. But there was food in his dish, and there was water in his bowl. "You got everything you need. Stop poking me." I went back to the card game, but Tornado poked me again. "It's too dark to go for a walk," I said. He poked me again. I said to Sammy, "If I didn't know better, I'd think that Tornado wants to play cards." Sammy said, "Then play cards with him. I'm tired of this silly game." Because he was losing, Sammy threw down his cards and left the room. I looked down at Tornado. "You want to play cards?" I asked. Tornado looked at me. His ears came forward as if he were interested. I held out the cards so he could see them. His ears came forward some more. I shuffled the cards. Now his ears were almost over his eyes. "You want to play cards? Cards?" I held out the deck. He waited. I fanned out the deck. He waited. I could see that he was ready, willing, and able. He had that look he got when I had a ball and he was waiting for me to throw it. Then I had an idea. I put one card a little further out than the rest. "Pick a card, Tornado," I said. "Pick any card you want." Tornado took one step forward. He stretched out his neck. He took the card. He took the card. I remember it to this day. It was the 3 of Hearts. The dog was standing there with the 3 of Hearts in his mouth. Tornado stood there. I sat there. We waited. The trouble is, I didn't know what we were waiting for. I had a dog with the 3 of Hearts in his mouth, a dog who could do a card trick, but I didn't know what the trick was. Put it back, I said, offering him the deck. He didn't move. I tried to take the card from him and put it back myself, but he would not let go. My daddy came into the kitchen for a glass of buttermilk. I said, "Daddy, Tornado knows a card trick." "Does he?" "At least I think he does." "Well, he knows half a card trick." "Half a card trick's better than none." See, I held out the cards like this, and he took one, but now he won't let it go. "Tornado, drop it," my daddy commanded. Tornado dropped the card and wagged his tail. "Good dog," my daddy said. "Daddy, do you want to see the card trick? I think I can do it now." "If it doesn't take too long, I want to hear the news." I put the card back in the deck. It didn't want to go because it was wet now and there were teeth marks on it. "Pick a card, Tornado. Any card," I said. Tornado picked a card. I crossed my fingers for luck. "Tornado, if that card is the 3 of hearts, drop it." Tornado waited. "Drop it," my daddy ordered. Tornado dropped the 3 of hearts. "Good dog," I said. I felt really proud. I had a dog who could do a card trick, even though my daddy had to help. "Is that it?" my daddy said. "Yes, sir. You can get back to the news." "The news can wait. Let's try that trick again." Thank you so much for listening. There's several more chapters, and we'll read some more of it next week. Have a great afternoon and enjoy your families. Bye.